Today we're making classic coffee cake. Buttery cake, cinnamon sugar crumble, what's not to love? Let's get baking. This recipe comes together in a few parts. The first part is the filling. This is that layer of cinnamon sugar that's in the middle of our coffee cake, and that's all that's in it, cinnamon and sugar. We have a cup of brown sugar, to which we will add 1.5 tablespoons of cinnamon. This is the good stuff. 1.5. There we go. And we're just going to stir that so that the cinnamon and the sugar are relatively evenly dispersed. Here we go, cinnamon, sugar, stirred together, and we're going to set that aside. Next thing we'll do is put together the topping. And for that, we are going to need a cup of granulated sugar. As always, recipe and measurements are in the description below. To our granulated sugar, we will be adding, a cup of flour, just regular old all-purpose flour. Too much. There we go, perfect. And we are going to put into that some salt. We just need about 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt. If you're using salted butter, for this stuff you could skip the salt altogether. All right, and another tablespoon of cinnamon. And we are going to stir this together, just so we see the cinnamon mixed pretty thoroughly in. Once those ingredients are mixed together, we are going to add 6 tablespoons of melted butter. I've got unsalted butter here, that's why I put a little salt in. If you're using salted butter, skip that 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Our butter is going to go in. We will stir. Like so. You see it's still pretty crumbly. We're just making sure there are no little pools of butter or dry patches of flour or sugar. And that guy gets set aside as well. And we can move on to the main attraction, which is the cake batter itself. So I've already got some sugar in here. We have 1.5 cups of granulated sugar and about 1/3 of a cup, exactly 1/3 of a cup of brown sugar. To this, we are going to add 1.25 teaspoons of salt. Again, if you wind up using salted butter for this, skip that last 1/4 teaspoon. So there's our salt. We're going to put in here 12 tablespoons of butter that has been softened to room temperature. So that works out to 1.5 sticks of butter. There's 1. And there's 1/2. That set aside. And we will put in here as well 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. We're going to give this a mix. I'm using a stand mixer. You can use a hand mixer. You can use a wooden spoon and some elbow grease for that matter. Right? And we are going to mix this together until it is a smooth, cohesive mixture. that took about a minute or so of mixing, starting on low, working our way up to medium, and scraping down once with a rubber spatula. To this, we're going to add 3 eggs. We'll add them one at a time and mix thoroughly after each egg. Make sure not to add shell. Our eggs are mixed in. We're going to give the bowl a little scrape. And now it's time to add our dry ingredients along with our dairy ingredients. So I have already mixed together the dry ingredients, or the remaining dry ingredients, which are 3 3/4 cups flour and 2½ teaspoons of baking powder. We're going to add that to the batter alternately with some dairy ingredients. So we'll measure those out. We're using sour cream. If you don't have sour cream but have plain yogurt, that is fine. Use yogurt, that'll work just fine. If it's a little bit thick, you can always thin it with a bit of milk or some buttermilk. All right, and we are going to put in here 3/4 cup or 170 grams of sour cream. If you can manage to let this come to room temperature, great. If not, it's really not the end of the world. As long as your butter's soft enough to mix, everything else is gravy there. All right, good enough, 70 grams. And then we are going to add to that 3/4 cup of milk, so you wind up with 2 cups altogether, and that's going to work out to 283 grams. I love my kitchen scale, just saying. Right? A bit more. Almost there. All right, good enough. And we're going to stir this together. It does not have to be completely smooth. There we go. A few lumps remaining are fine, but we're just going to stir this together so it isn't like huge kind of islands or flotillas of sour cream in with the milk. So once that's done, we will start with our dry ingredients. Roughly 1/3 of this at a time. Don't have to be too thorough, we just don't want huge pockets of flour there that would clump together with our dairy. So again, about 1/3 of the dairy ingredients. More flour, more dairy, you get the idea. All right, and our batter has come together. So we're going to go ahead and scrape off the paddle, scrape down the sides, and get ready to assemble our cake. All right, we have our batter. If you are keeping score at home, that's about 6 cups of batter, and we are going to add half of it, so roughly 3 cups, to a buttered 9x13 pan. You can do this in 2 round 9-inch pans. You can do it in 2 square 8-inch pans. You get the idea. All right, and we are just gonna kind of plop that batter in there. It's not an exact science. If you get just a little over or a little under half of this batter into the pan, your coffee cake will still be just fine. I'm gonna call it about half. And onto this, we will sprinkle that brown sugar and cinnamon topping. We'll go for as even a layer as we can get. There is our brown sugar. Made sure to get all the way out to the edges. Onto this, we will place the last of our batter. Here I am going to be a little bit more careful, so I'm going to spread that evenly without shifting the brown sugar and cinnamon filling too much, although we are going to give this a little bit of a marble, so you know, if some of that moves, it's all right that it doesn't all stay in place. Once I have that in the pan, I'm going to carefully spread it out so that we cover all of those patches of filling. And then, once we've done that, get all the way out to the edges here. Go. We are actually going to give this a little bit of a swirl. Can do that with the knife I used to cut the butter earlier. We're just going to swirl that a little bit, sort of a marbling action. We don't want to completely mix those layers together that we just made, but we'll just marble them a bit, and that'll come out well in the end. Okay, now it is time to put our topping on. You can do that with the fork, but it works better if you use your hands. So we're just going to crumble that on. And it's okay if some of it is really fine and sandy and other bits are a little more crumbly. Just the crumbly bits have a bit more butter in them, so I suppose we don't want them to all land in one part of the cake. We'll spread all that around. Making sure to get all the way out to the edges. And if there are some bits that are really sandy, that's fine. And bits that are kind of chunkier, also fine. We'll just make sure that those chunky bits, those are the ones with more butter in them. Just make sure those don't all wind up in the same part or concentrated in the same part of the cake. All right. So we've given our crumble topping a little pat to keep that in place. And this is about the time we would be expecting to slide this into a 350-degree oven, but possibly the best part about this recipe is that we can put it in the refrigerator overnight instead. So if you're tired and you just don't want to wait up another hour for it to bake, or you want a slightly warm coffee cake in the morning, or the smell of the cinnamon sugar to fill your kitchen as your brunch guests arrive, this recipe is for you. So I'm going to put a lid on this, and we will come back in the morning when it's time to bake. Good morning. Our coffee cake spent the night in the refrigerator. Our oven is preheated to 350 degrees, and it is time to bake. We'll let this go for about 55 minutes and then check with a toothpick for doneness. If the batter is still a little bit wet, at that point we'll give it another 5 minutes, check again, and so forth. See you when this guy's baked. Our coffee cake is out of the oven. It took just over an hour because it was going in cold, and now that it's cooled a little bit, it is time to take a taste. You can hear the crunching as we slice into that topping. Sneak out just a little corner here. Possibly with the help of a fork. And here we have it, coffee cake with plush yellow cake, cinnamon sugar, and crumble on top. I'm gonna give this a taste. We hope you give this a try and you check back every Friday at 4 o'clock for a new recipe.